On a cold October morning in 1962, the world unknowingly stood closer to total nuclear annihilation than ever before.
Ever since the invention of nuclear weapons, humanity has almost accidentally destroyed itself many times over.
There were no alarms in the streets, no emergency broadcasts on televisions, and no sirens screaming across cities. People went to work. Children went to school. Life continued as normal. But behind closed doors, inside submarine hulls, underground bunkers, and emergency war rooms, a handful of men were making decisions that could erase civilization in minutes. This is not a story of explosions or mushroom clouds. This is a story of how the world almost ended quietly and how it survived by chance, hesitation, and human fear. This is the story of the day World War almost went nuclear. Part 1, a world divided by fear by the early 1960s. The world was split into two hostile camps. On one side stood the United States and its allies. On the other, the Soviet Union and the Eastern Bloc. Both sides possessed nuclear weapons powerful enough to destroy entire cities in seconds. The guiding philosophy was simple and terrifying. If one side launches, the other will respond. Everyone loses. This idea was known as mutually assured destruction. Peace did not exist because nations trusted one another. Peace existed because everyone feared the consequences of war. But fear has limits. And in 1962, those limits were tested. The discovery that changed everything. On October 14th, 1962, an American U-2 spy plane flew over Cuba. Hidden beneath clouds and jungle camouflage were long, unmistakable shapes. Soviet nuclear missile launch sites. These missiles were not defensive. They were offensive weapons capable of striking major U.S. cities within minutes. Washington, New York, Chicago, all suddenly vulnerable. When the photographs reached President John F. Kennedy, the reality was clear. The Soviet Union had secretly placed nuclear weapons just 90 miles from American soil. The Cold War had entered its most dangerous phase. 13 days of silence and panic for the next 13 days. The world lived inside a silent crisis. The U.S. government debated its options. Do nothing and appear weak, launch airstrikes against Cuba, invade the island, or prepare for nuclear war. Any aggressive move could trigger a Soviet response. Any hesitation could allow the missiles to become operational. President Kennedy chose a middle path, a naval blockade, called a quarantine, around Cuba. It was a gamble. If Soviet ships attempted to cross the blockade, American forces would be forced to stop them. And if shots were fired, escalation would be inevitable. October 27, 1962. Black Saturday, October 27th, would later become known as Black Saturday. It was the single most dangerous day of the Cold War. That morning, American forces shot down a Soviet U-2 spy plane over Cuba. The pilot was killed. Washington feared retaliation. Moscow demanded answers. Inside the Kremlin, Soviet leaders debated whether the act was intentional or the first step toward war. Meanwhile, unknown to both governments, something far more dangerous was happening deep underwater. The submarine that nearly ended the world beneath the Atlantic Ocean. A Soviet submarine known as B-59 was being hunted by U.S. naval forces. The Americans dropped practice depth charges, meant as warning signals. But inside the submarine, cut off from communication, the crew believed war may have already begun. The submarine carried a nuclear torpedo. Its explosive power was comparable to the bomb that destroyed Hiroshima. According to Soviet protocol, launching the nuclear weapon required agreement from 3 officers: the captain, the political officer, and the flotilla commander. On board 2 of the 3 agreed. They believed nuclear war had already started. They believed they were under attack. One man stood in the way. His name was Vasily Arkhipov. He was not the captain. He was not the political officer, but his approval was mandatory. Inside the overheated submarine, with failing air systems and exhausted crew members, Arkhipov made a decision that would define human history. He refused. Arkhipov argued that they had no confirmation of war. He insisted they surface and wait for orders. After hours of tension, the submarine surfaced. The nuclear torpedo was never launched. The world never knew how close it came to annihilation. Leaders at the brink, while Arkhipov prevented disaster at sea, Political leaders faced their own crisis. In Washington, military advisors urged Kennedy to strike Cuba. In Moscow, Nikita Khrushchev feared that delay would lead to invasion. Communication between the two superpowers was slow and unclear. Messages took hours. Assumptions filled the gaps. Any misinterpretation could trigger a launch order. The fate of the world depended on restraint, the secret compromise behind public threats and speeches. Quiet negotiation took place. The Soviet Union agreed to remove its missiles from Cuba. In return, the United States secretly agreed to remove its nuclear missiles from Turkey. This part of the deal was hidden from the public. Both sides needed to save face. Both sides needed to step back from the edge. On October 28, 1962, the crisis ended. The world exhaled, without ever realizing it had been holding its breath. What was nearly lost if a single torpedo had launched? If a single order had been misread? If a single commander had chosen aggression? The result would not have been limited. Nuclear retaliation would follow. Cities would vanish. Communication networks would collapse. The modern world as we know it would end. And it almost did. Lessons written in silence. No monuments were built for this day. No victory parades were held. Yet it may be the most important non-event in human history. It proved something uncomfortable, that civilization does not survive solely because of systems or strategies, but because, sometimes, ordinary humans choose restraint over fear. Vasily Arkhipov never launched a weapon. John F. Kennedy never ordered an invasion. Nikita Khrushchev chose compromise over pride, and the world survived. How close we still are. The nuclear weapons of today are far more powerful than those of 1962. The margin for error is still terrifyingly small. The lesson of that day remains clear. The end of the world does not begin with explosions. It begins with misunderstanding, and sometimes survival depends on one person saying one simple word. No. Because on that day, World War almost went nuclear, and humanity survived by seconds.